on them, and with the few people that we have, we got 4, 3, 7, 1, 2, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 out of 27. So we're climbing in population here. Let me make a comment on the articles in a minute. So let me talk about logistics. All right. We actually had discussed canceling class tonight, and we kind of collectively decided that we knew that we were going to experience a lack of sort of face-to-face. So Dr. Mueller and I discussed some alternatives, and we came up with what we hope is acceptable. Now, those of you that aren't here aren't going to hear this, but hopefully those of them that aren't here know the routine now, and you'll see the video. Am I not live? Oh, if some of them are looking at this live, all right. Okay, so those people that know that technology, that's good. They can participate from home if you're so inclined. If not, people kind of know the routine, and what will happen is that John will send me a link, and then tomorrow, as soon as I get that, I will post that under course documents, and then whatever we do tonight will be on available. And so that's step one. All right. Step two, and there has been somewhat of a discussion to me via email with selected folks in terms of still a kind of a confusion about exactly what was going to happen tonight, specifically with regard to, are we doing formalized presentations or having conversations? And so my thoughts were that tonight was not designed to be formalized presentations. Hopefully we would have everybody just informally say, here's what's going on in my project, and I do have a little bit more of a focused set of question or two about each of those things. So tonight, for those of us that are here, I will elicit from you sort of a framework for an informal talk about what you're doing, both in the research project and the post-class company evaluation. So that'll be available, and those that aren't here can watch that. Now, that means that for those of you that are here and were able to either find it in your risk factors to brave weather or whatever it took to get here, rather than punishing you or somebody else, it seemed to us, to Dr. Mueller and I, that we needed to at least make the opportunity available to everyone to have to do the same things that we're expecting of our face-to-face. And so what we did, or what I did then, was there are 2 new forums under the discussion site, right? One is for the paper, and there's 2 questions or 3 questions there. And then one is the post-class company evaluation, and there's a couple of questions there. Now, those are not intended to be exhaustive, write a paper. It's like, what changes did you make to your evaluation criteria? I added social factors. So it's very cryptic, very bullet point stuff. But it's a way for those people that aren't here to then share with the rest of us, what they have done. And I would hope that even those of you that are here, would take the opportunity over the next week to get online and to look and see what our colleagues have shared with us in their papers also. But they will be expected to do the same things that you're doing, except online. And so I emailed everybody that tonight. So everybody got a blanket email saying, if you're not here, watch the video, go online, post your comments on your learning from your paper, and post your comments on your post-class company evaluation. And then I would share with you also a concern that at least 3 people expressed to me in terms of my evaluation of what at one point was a 100-point formal presentation, assignment 8. All right, that grade will be, once you turn in your full paper, right, I will be looking at your comments tonight and a, quote, participation grade, which will maximize a point, and then averaging that out with what connections you've made or not made between your formal paper and your informal presentation. So you will get a grade, and it will be an average kind of a thing. And once again, those of you that have some concerns about my particular interpretation of your competency, feel free to talk to me and we'll discuss it. Yes, ma'am.
You had a chance to read all of our research papers?
No.
Or, okay, so some of this...
I apologize. My full intention was to do that yesterday, and as all of us experiencing the end of quarter crunches, I didn't. But that tomorrow, I have no committee assignments. I have no classes. I will be grading my first assignment tomorrow. My assignment is to grade assignment 7 for this class. So I would say that if you're concerned about my comments on that paper, and don't go to Blackboard and get some of the comments and grades by late tomorrow afternoon, email me, call me, and I'll get back. I'll do it immediately.
All right, thank you.
Fair enough? So no, I haven't done number 7, but that will be tomorrow's first assignment for me. All right. Does that kind of take care of logistics? I don't see any great hands. We're getting some folks in attendance here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We're getting there. I need to ask sort of a weather question, and this pertains to everybody, but can I just get like a show of hands of those of you that at right this minute are kind of concerned about late night driving?
The wind blows.
Yeah, so we've got several. And again, I don't know whether to offer this as this is a gift to you or an apology for not doing it, but right now I'm not feeling compelled to run us to 9:30. I would like to get through the articles and get through the stuff as quickly as we can, and then get you safely home. Is that an acceptable use of our time tonight? And then, too, there will be the discussion format that will be left open all week long. So that which we didn't sort of fully engage in, and maybe you get sort of tickled by something that happens tonight and we don't really fully let it all out, we can talk about that online for another week. Yes, ma'am?
Do you want us to comment on the discussions of the people that aren't here?
I think that it would be appropriate, in your final reaction paper to what we did tonight and listening to our colleagues' commentary also along with the articles. But I'm not going to hold us hard and fast to that. What I will hold us hard and fast to is that those of you that are here, articles and classroom discussion, right? Those that aren't here, they're going to have to watch the tape and engage with each other. But we've got a limited population of engagement, and it would be more. It's just, and once again, if you feel like that my interpretation of your evaluation of your last reaction paper is inappropriate, feel free to holler. Is that enough of that answer? Okay. All right. Let me yet another different tactic on this. Once I came in and just told you what I thought of the articles, and then we talked about it. And then another time we divided up into the groups and let you deal with the articles and bring that back to the class. And then I made some commentary on that. In the interest of time, what I'd like to do is forego the sort of group involvement from each audience, and trust that those of you that read them would be willing to sort of lay out some opinions about what major points were, or what was as this one author called, the critical inch. What was that salient point that came out? By the way, that's interesting comment that I used that. I'm reading Barry Posner's latest book, The Truths About Leadership. And in the latest chapter, he talks about introspection a great deal. And where I keep asking students to say, what was the critical one point? Well, not several key issues, but what was the one key issue? and I get a lot of sort of concern about what did you really mean by that, and then I gig somebody 4 points or 5 points on their article, a reaction because they gave me 6 points instead of 1, and yet in Barry Posner's latest chapter, he talks about that very thing. He says, as we look at our leadership tendencies or other people's leadership tendencies, what's the one thing that keeps on showing up over and over and over in your life? Whatever reason it's for. Maybe it's a negative factor or a positive factor, but if it keeps on showing up all the time, maybe it's something that we ought to deal with. So I would ask you now to think about, as you read these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different articles, what kept coming up? What kept coming up? So let's do that. I'm going to ask for your feedback first, and then I'll give you some commentary from my perceptions of the article. So the first one was a Maidman article called Building Culture. There's a man named Edgar Schein. Oh, time out here too. I just had one of the projects in my undergraduate classes, I had yet another student compiling for me a one-stop shop bibliography of all those things that I keep throwing on the table. And so if anybody's interested in that, feel free to holler and I'll email you. It's about a 9-page bibliography of stuff that I've hollered about, for the last several years. And so it's compiled in a fairly complete and readable format, now. So anyway, speaking of the names, Edgar Schein is one of the people that talks to us a great deal about organizational socialization, like orientation programs, and is that what culture is or not. So I do have some commentary, but let me hear from y'all. Anyone, I'll just open the field up to observations on what do you do about organizational culture? Is it good? Is it bad? What hit you when you read the article? Anybody?
I liked when they were talking about how you're supposed to, when you're setting up your 3 or 4 guiding principles, to expect resistance. I thought that was interesting, because the resistance you'll get at first, is people that don't feel the same way, I guess.
Right.
And so the resistance going away is either those people leaving and getting new people that are the same way as the company, or those people changing their ways.
So by being so vocal about that, you almost give some people choices.
Right.
I like it. I don't like it. I can fight you. I can deal with it. I can adapt. I can fight. I can leave. But they're there.
Yeah, and the way I saw it was, you've got your role and mission statement, and then backed up with those 3 to 4, principles, I guess,
Right.
and let those guide you in making your decisions.
Other commentary, Hermas and Clackamas. What are get some comments from out there?
One of the things on that meeting resistance that kept circling around my head is because I've often presented ideas to my staff and been met with resistance. And what I've come to, I guess, kind of understand is it's not so much about what it is that I present, it's how it is that I present it to them. And I think the article made a good point. You've got to have these guiding principles. They've got to be firm. You have to know what they are. Don't be ambivalent about them. But I think the amount of resistance that you get has a lot to do with how they're communicated or how they're implemented. Yeah.
The relationship.
Yeah. If it's just like this memo that kind of just goes out to the company, like, here's who we are, then you're going to get a lot more of that resistance versus pulling in some input and stuff from people.
And how many times do we say, here's who we are?
Yeah.
And how many times did they get it? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. There's a comment in the back here.
To go along with it, I kind of wrote about this in my reaction response too, so you'll be hearing it twice. But a lot of it kind of depends on the personality type of the employee as to how much resistance you're going to get. And the way I related it was back to like a high school classroom setting where you'll have like a teacher's pet and the A students, the people that do just what they need to get by, and then like the people that are there because they have to be, they don't want to be. And so when it comes to doing things, I mean, when you're talking about building culture, and part of that is like social events and things like that around the office, and getting people together, there's gonna be the people that are gonna wanna please you, and they're gonna be there, you know, like, trying to
Anyway.
get that extra A, and there's gonna be the people that are like, I really hate my job, but I gotta go do this, and it's all gonna kinda depend on employee attitude a lot too.
Right. And the boss's attitude, the presentation
Right.
style, and the reception style.
Right.
You know, yeah. You know, other thoughts on this? We had a similar exercise in one of my undergraduate classes a week or so ago dealing with the socialization issue. And I started that class out by asking them to divide it up into small groups, and ask them to tell each other joining stories. What happens when you joined an organization? And one student said, do you mean initiation rites? And I said, yeah, that'll do. And so you think about, you know, fraternities, sororities, athletic teams, probationary employment. You know, how did you get initiated into the job, either positively or negatively? And how does that equate into sort of positive results-producing behavior over time? So does that make some sense? That, you know, think about that for a moment as an organizational culture is developed. You know, what about those joining stories? How do people join organizations? And does that impact this thing called organizational culture? We're still thinking about the snow outside. You know?
Well, I kind of have something to go along with that idea about joining it. It's kind of like, I know I relate a lot of things to sports, but when you come to a new team, you know, like if you're a freshman here or whatnot, when you first come, everybody, like, they all want to hang out with you and you just become part of a family and you fall into it. Whereas you guys just kind of want to be together and you just become a part of it. So I think when you're thrown into a new environment like that, most people just adapt to it and become a part of it. As long as the people around them are encouraging and, you know.
If it's positive.
Right.
You know, that was another part that we talked about in the undergraduate class. At what point does the rites of passage become so hurtful, deconstructive, that it's hard for you to assimilate as a positive producing member? And if that initiation rite or that cultural indoctrination is a positive one, no matter what we do to engage you in the team concept, you know, it needs to have at least enough positive reinforcement that we can move past that period of assimilation into the company's culture. You know, so that makes some sense. You know. More commentary. Yes, sir.
I had an example of there's corporate culture, but there's an often underlying group culture that goes counter to the corporate cultures. I had a case where I interviewed for a job once, and interviewed with the manager and his manager, and then I interviewed with kind of some of the team people, and I thought it was kind of strange, if you want to say it, but some of these guys just, cussed up a storm in the interview. And, you just kind of let it, ignore it or whatever. And I got hired and went there, and then later we were hiring somebody. And going into the interview ahead of time, these same guys say, okay, we're doing the same thing, we're going to cuss.
So it was very articulated, deliberate?
Yeah,
That's
see,
interesting.
because they didn't, to make sure they could get somebody in the group that, wasn't, well, they were looking for guys to go to bars and stuff with them. that kind of
Corporate
rougher crowd.
Well, what is the sort of company personality?
Yeah, well, and I know for a fact, their the immediate boss was kind of on that, but the one above that, he would have just freaked, because
Because it was going against his personal grain.
Yes, big time.
Well, that's Barry Posner's, at least one of the pieces of that. He's always big on credibility and integrity. And he's saying where the most pervasive and powerful corporate cultures, immaterial of what behaviors you see on either side of that spectrum, are when the behaviors of the executives are very consistent with the values that are played out in word. So if they really are that way and that permeates the organization, then it's probably going to be more successfully than where you see this cut of what I say versus what I do. You know, an example of that comes from the days when I was doing team building and leadership with the city of Lewiston. They had a new police chief that came in with a different value on the way that we do police work and enforcement, and it was like community involvement, preventive stuff, and very much not the mainstream older guard of the police folks that came in. And he was sort of in harmony with the words that were being put out to the community, and they were going to get people on the streets and, you know, be involved with the citizens and stop their cars every once in a while and talk to people. And I was in one of those workshops where we had somebody from each department and somebody from each level, and I overheard one of the middle top police executives saying, well, I know what so-and-so said, but it ain't happening on my watch. We're doing quotas. You know, so it was very much a, you know, difference in culture, that this other person wanted to change the story, and it wasn't going to happen because you had a very, you know, remarkable separation. And that's why one of the things that I'm reading about this stuff on the potency of behavioral results has to be the more that it permeates across all the levels and across all the functions, the more we all get it. Even going into those pockets of that team over there, they can't be all by themselves special anymore. We want them to feel special because they're going to produce this kind of results, but we have to make sure that they're still seeing that whole thing. So that brings me to another thing is, as Cameron was pointing out, the 3 to 4 guiding principles, one of the most probably remarkable ones that I've seen of that is one of the couple of 3 presidents ago from where I used to teach, Lewis Clark State College. Every year, Lee Vickers would come to the opening faculty meetings and say, and it was always 10. It wasn't 3 to 4. But he came out with his agenda for the year, his guiding principles. And we talked about him as being very autocratic and very pushy, and we called it the 115% Vickers stretch, that he made everybody do all these things. But you could take it to the bank. And he would say very, very consciously and very deliberately, this is what we're doing this year. And if you don't like it, get out of my way. If you like it, come help me. We'll work on it. And you kind of knew that if you were going to get access to merit pay or any of the rewards that are going to be available, that you had to join the agenda. But you had a choice. You knew that that was corporate culture for the year. And you could say, I'm going to fight him. I don't like it. It's against my pedagogy, or it's against some ideological value. So, but you knew you were, out. You got to get in the ring with him if you disagreed. Or you could say, I could adapt. Or you could say, you know what? It's not my year. Lee, do whatever you're going to do. I'm going to go to my classroom and hibernate. And that was okay too. But you knew the consequence was you're not going to be a major player in the corporate culture this year. All as a result of a very, very deliberate and honest statement of this is what we're going to do this year. So, and you like that. You can kind of take that to the bank. Yes, ma'am.
That goes along with what I was going to ask, because when I was doing my paper, I came across Dr. Frederick Herzberg,
Yeah.
but it was in the work and nature of man.
Right.
And he was talking about what motivates a worker.
Right.
And he was talking about hygiene and how hygiene doesn't really motivate them. It's the building up of the person. But he says when that building up of the person, like O'Toole was talking about, Aristotle saying, invest in your people.
Right.
But what he was saying is when you don't do that investment, what motivates them then are these hygiene factors,
Which
are
doesn't
the-
get us very far.
It doesn't get you very far, which
As far as
is-
high-performance
Which is
systems.
like what you were just saying, it's the salary, it's the monetary things, but it's
Right.
not the personal growth things.
I don't know that I really spent a lot of time on the motivational night with Hertzberg's work, but it's there. We could probably go revisit that tape. And I don't have a quote on this one in terms of their work together, but I had an undergraduate student once upon a time that thinks that Hertzberg and Maslow actually did some collaboration at some point, and that if you look at Maslow's way up there,
Yeah.
the self-actualization, the contentment, the meaning in life, and Viktor Frankl's work on Man's Search for Meaning, that it's really consistent with Hertzberg's, what he calls the motivator factors. And I'm going to ask this question. I think that I said it on that night, but I might not have. If I say that which you don't have motivates you, and that which you do have motivates you, does that ring a bell?
Yep.
That's what we're talking about. The food and water I don't have. If I get it, I don't have it, I'm motivated to get it, but if I get it, so what? However, the real push, which is hard work, is that which I do have. How long will it take us to discover the glimmers, the little bits of spark that each of us individually or collectively happen? You know, that is what's going to push high performance. And that's where I think the beauty of Hertzberg's work motivational theories connects up with Maslow's.
It made a lot of sense when
Yeah.
I was reading it.
And the corporate culture stuff, that's where corporate culture is created, is when the collective sort of differentiation, but integration. And I'll say those words again. And if it's not in the bibliography, I'll put it in the bibliography. But the work of a man named Csikszentmihalyi, he does work on flow and high performance, both individually and at the organizational level, in a book that he calls Good Business. He says organizations are extremely complicated systems, okay? And this thing of culture, which for a moment, let's relate to high performance. We want them to produce and be able to sustainably create results that keep them out there competitive in the marketplace. And as a result of that complicated system, in a natural unfolding, Csikszentmihalyi says that you've got to have differentiation. Each of us has to be different. If you're not allowed that differentiation, something breaks down in you personally, right? So we have diversity. But if the system is going to sustain itself, it is going to have to sort of collectively center itself around something that it does. That's integration. So where does it become the collective? And then back to what you said, your comment of the corporate culture versus the little pocket culture, that's got to somehow work itself out before we can produce. And that little argument that's happening between the police chief and that one of his, shift supervisors, that's going to have to work itself out healthily, or they're going to have some conflict over that. All right, does that make sense? Here's another quickly on that. Ask yourself if the organization wears short sleeves or long sleeves. This kind of thing right here, that doesn't cut it in some companies. And somebody once upon a time said, the short sleeves always work for the long sleeves. Does your company have a beard? Does your company wear a white shirt and a red tie? Does your company wear paisleys? Look at that, just to see if that, and you get a sense of, oh, I get it. I got to know what the culture is. Yes, sir.
That brings another job interview type thing. I had a phone interview, and it was with the owners of the company were Japanese, and I'm familiar with Japanese culture. My wife lived there quite a while, and they're very rigid, and we've talked about culture. And in the phone interview, I asked the manager, about that. What
What I wear.
well, not about what I wear, but just about the formality and rigidity of the, does that flow over? And I got a sense of, he covered it up, like, no, it's fine, it's great, we're all happy here. But I got this behind the scene feeling that maybe that was kind of too rigid.
Right.
And so when I went in for the actual interview, um, I wanted to test this in a way that I could get a feeling for it.
See what you're going to do with it later.
So
Am I
I
going to be
wore,
successful?
I wore slacks, a nice shirt, but I didn't put a tie on. And I did really well with the group. They had a technical test that I had scored higher than anybody else had ever, they were,
But that no tie thing,
but when I went to meet the CEO or whatever, he was a Japanese guy, and, he was nice enough, but he was not happy that I didn't have a tie on.
Right.
And it answered my question that they were rigid, and it wasn't going to be the kind of an open
kind of thing.
kind of thing.
Similar kind of different cultures, different behaviors. And like my kids say, they've got a schizophrenic dad, hippie and a Marine at the same time. So in my transitions from being that right-wing conservative, military person to this whatever I may be or may not be, back in my boots and blue jeans days, but I had not shoulder-length hair, did in my hippie post-Vietnam days, but I had hair like it was down to this level, and I had a long mustache, and I had cut a contract with a relatively conservative organization to do some team building, and it was okay. The contract was already cut, and then I finally met with the CEO of a regional organization, and the day after I met with the CEO, I got called into the dean's office and said, your image, you might need to think about your dress. You might need to think about getting a haircut. You might need to think about cutting your mustache. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to do it. And so I called the CEO back and I said, look, so-and-so, let's just tear the contract. Oh, no. We don't tear the contract up. He's already cut the contract. But it was obviously my dress, my appearance didn't fit with his state. And they even had a company policy that said, back to military policy of, mustaches that are here. And I said, look, I obviously am causing you some difficulty. Let's just sever the relationship. And he said, no, I want you to do the work. I said, but it was obviously a difference of how we fit, to the point that it was so bothersome to him that he had to call the school officials and say, you got this image problem out there in the community. I said, okay, fine. So interesting. Let's move on. Maidment has an article on her performance appraisal. Any sort of salient points on what hit you in that article? Yeah, go ahead.
I've been through enough performance appraisals, and, I have to say, for the most part, they've been bogus. I mean, they've been absolutely
Arbitrational
worthless.
point systems, you got to give somebody this many points.
Worthless. Yeah,
Yeah.
worthless. I mean, and I've been on the other end, where I have been with organizations that have problems with an employee because the employee doesn't like the performance evaluation, and it's like it's like a free-for-all almost. And
Right.
so when I was reading through this, it was like, yeah, exactly, because what I've seen is that they say that they want to give you this information so that you can work on it and become a better person and employee.
Improve.
Yeah, but the person that's delivering it covers it up. It's like
Back to the
sweet clothing.
attitudinal of how I present the data to you.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm demoralized and marginalized
And
for X
come,
amount of time.
I've come out of them saying, okay, I need to work on this, but he says I'm okay. I need to,
Is that a hand up? I see a hand. You want to
Yeah.
talk?
Yeah, where I work, we have to evaluate ourselves.
Cool.
And if you don't have enough negative stuff, they make you redo it until you have improvements of at least 3 items. And I find that it's no matter what you do, you're never going to be doing good enough. So I find it very counterproductive, and I don't like it.
And I would concur with both of these statements. And actually, if you involve yourselves in a more academic and concentrated pursuit of the field of human resource management, the human resource management literature, the research, will support both of your comments with what they call critical incident theory, and that is that particular type of evaluation will focus on negative compliance. And that may be bad or good. It may be that the mistakes that you're making are, when we think about innovation and creativity, they keep telling us that you got to make those mistakes that gut out there in that innovative, creative marketplace, and yet we're being told, no, fix this, fix this, fix this. And then what happens is that management or leaders or supervisors tend to focus on critical incidents that were not in compliance with predetermined behavior, and that becomes the focus. And it is demoralizing if that's all I'm looking at. And even in psychology, in the field, the brain field, the people, the neurologists talk about that if that's what you hit on, and it's so emotional, that's where you stop, rather than being able to move past that in terms of, like Wrath and other people say, focus on what you're good at. What can you make improvements on? What works for you, rather than making little mistakes. Most of us know we've made little mistakes.
What I can't stand is, and what I think is really wrong, and strive to never do, is when these things don't come up until an evaluation, where you're working for 6 months for somebody, and it's like they're just saving these little
Right.
comments up in a box.
Right.
I'm in the middle of doing staff evaluations this week. I got to do 28 staff evals, and every single thing that I've talked about that their job needs performance on, I've already talked to them about.
Which
what
is
this
absolutely
is a summation of, here's how this quarter has gone. These are the hiccups that we've had. We've already talked about them. Here's the improvement I've seen in those.
Mhm.
Evaluations should be, from supervisors, should be ongoing. You shouldn't have to wait until 3 times a year to find out how it is you're doing.
Right. Now, there's a difference between driving 55 miles an hour as a law that you either break or not, and policy and statutory guidelines that are at the federal level. What's FLSA, what's the EOC, which is law, but in terms of the force and scope of enforcement, doesn't play out like you broke the law, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
However, what you just said, it is in human resource law, and a good human resource lawyer, corporate lawyer, would be able to say, you didn't point out this incorrect behavior early enough in their probationary time and give them an opportunity to fix that.
Yeah.
So, ordinary talk about what you're doing and how well we're doing. Oh, that's back to the culture thing. Does your culture allow for, so the unfolding of appropriate behavior in a timely manner? Or, I just don't fit, I got to leave. Rather than, oh, you got a year. Oh, I didn't know that. You just hit me upside the head with the 2 before, and it's like, gosh, I had no idea. And that's scary.
I've been through a lot of evaluations too, and the best ones I've seen is where you want to evaluate yourself, but even before that, you created the evaluation criteria the year before with your manager, what goals you were going to do, and they were supposed to be measurable,
That SMART thing that we talked about earlier this quarter.
and so that, right?
Right.
You knew what you were being evaluated on
Mhm.
all year because you created it. And so if your boss wanted something different from you, he would help you or define the criteria for next year. So only if you ignored that, maybe you'd been doing something and then you put that in the evaluation and ignored it for a whole year, would it actually ever hurt you?
Yeah. Let me share with you, some of you may have already been exposed to this acronym, but it's been used and misused and added to and unadded to over the years. MBO, Management by Objectives. But I'd call your attention to the originators of that, both Peter Drucker and a man named George Odiorn, and they said what you're talking about, that if those objectives are determined mutually well in advance of the time that we're going to evaluate, then that's a healthy process. But what that quickly became was not MBO, but MBMO, Management by My Objectives. I'm telling you what you're going to do. I'll evaluate it according to this. And then it breaks down a bit. But if you and I mutually determine what are appropriate ways of determining my performance, then we can do that all year long. And that's healthy. And George Odiorn and Peter Drucker were the first ones that really started pushing that MBO process. And that's good. That's healthy. There was a hand back here.
Yeah, the problem that I have with them, I guess, disclose this information. I had an employer and it was a physical labor job. And I received a bad evaluation. My boss had a thing against females and especially educated females, and I couldn't win with him at all. Like, he just didn't like me.
There's a glass ceiling thing going on.
And so I would be like, it was never that I was slacking on the job or anything like that. There were numerous times where I was out working for the full 8 hours and I'd look over and he'd just be like sitting there on a stump type of thing, you know. And then he gave me an evaluation with 2.5 weeks before I was leaving. And he scored me poor in every category. Said I didn't get along with anybody, that I was a horrible worker, I didn't do my job, blah, 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 blah. Which I'm pretty sure if anybody's actually been around me, I'm really not hard to get along with at all. And I was friends with everybody there, and I always did more than what was asked of me. I was kind of picking up slack for my other crew members. And so they gave me 2.5 weeks to try to change that evaluation around. And when the time came back around, like, I started doing even more. I would show up early and get things done, and I was there after everybody when I wasn't paid for it, just because I didn't want a bad
You
evaluation.
probably didn't change it.
On my record, didn't change at all. Had the exact same scores at the end of the 2 weeks, and they're like, we probably wouldn't hire you back. But it's one of those things that the upper level management never worked with me and took that particular boss's word over everything else. And just because he did not like me and I was a female that was able to outwork him and was more educated.
Yeah,
than
how
him,
often do the people in the middle break down the dreams and the passions and the ideology of the top versus the excitement of the new employees or the employees that are on the line doing great work? You get this place in the middle that sort of breaks that down some.
Yeah.
You know, the middle management's extremely important because they're the liaisons, they're the interpretation, they're the bridge between the dreams of the creators of the organization and the doers of the organization. But when you get this kind of thing, you wonder how much we really need to continue to evaluate how much they fit too, you know, in that place. One more comment that I'll make, and that's this critical incident evaluation or negative selective evaluation. I would like to think that I didn't do this, but I actually fired an individual in the state of Texas for it was for abuse of clients, and I thought that was like, okay, well, you're getting walked out the door. This is not a conversation that we're having. You know, it's conclusive proof, you know, evidence and all that, so you're gone. But in this whole process of reinstatement, he and his wife both took the state of Texas and every line item executive, you know, in that chain of command to court, and we lost because of not the event of firing because of abusing clients, but because they said that we were subjecting this couple to negative selective evaluations. That we were using this thing that I talked about a minute ago, critical incidents, that's all we did. And that we would have to show that we had evaluated and subjected every single employee of the 250 that worked for me to the same kind of scrutiny in evaluating their records, which we couldn't have done, but I thought the events were entirely different. You know, subjecting somebody to larger, but just to show you how pervasive that could be in a court of law, this critical incident evaluation. But every one of you that have talked tonight have indicated that, you know, it seems to be permeating organizations that some level of scrutiny of behavior is that we use this negative stuff. We marginalize people, we subject them to fear, you know, and that it doesn't get us the kind of positive, you know, excitement that we'd like to see in high-performance organizations.
The point that you just mentioned there of having to evaluate everybody on the same criteria, that was his buyout with me, was that I did certain things very well, but he couldn't evaluate me on that because they would have to change the whole evaluation for everybody else. So that was his
See, and that would also negate what he did to you because it's still singling out. They can't do to you what they can't do to everybody else legally, but they do it anyway. Yes, sir?
Yeah, well, the evaluations that I've seen that were poor evaluations came not because your manager, but above him, if the evaluation's tied to pay, I've seen this where they tell the manager, you will have an average
Military
number of this
does that a great deal.
within your, because if you have higher, I mean, you've got to keep your average in your group to this. Because we're, you know, we've already determined how
predetermined-
much of a raise your group's gonna get, and,
Right.
and if
It's a
you,
predetermined number that you have to meet that may or may not be relevant to actual performance. The consortium of many of the business colleges in California, their faculty have to subject students to a bell curve in every class. And I want to say, what's to say that the 30 people that I've got are not all brilliant, and what's to say that the 30 people that I've got are not all marginal performers? How can I do a bell curve? But they're saying that, I don't know what the grade point is, it's like 2.8 or whatever, but if your grades on the average as a faculty member drop before the prescribed norm, you're a bad teacher, and you get bad evaluations. So it's like, I don't know about that. What's to say I can't give everybody A's? Because you all deserve it. You all met the criteria. You know, so other comments?
the thing in the company that made that bad is, I worked for a group that had a small budget, and they had to be very selective in hiring. And the group that had a very large budget, they could just shotgun hire people.
Right.
And so our manager was hand-tied. You know, he had purposely got better people because he had to do more work with who he had.
But the differentiation in your work groups creates another factor that's out there in the performance appraisal literature called rater bias, because you had two different bosses that were rating upon the different scales. No, not different scales, because they had a prescribed scale, but they're looking at it from different points of view. So you got a biasness in the raters that makes it unequal, a rater bias. One more comment and then we'll move on.
Okay, so wouldn't that ultimately end up hurting a company, because you're gonna look around at your coworkers and know that you're doing the same level of work, or that maybe your work's even better, and then see them getting raises and better evaluations and wonder why you're always constantly not
Right.
up there to par with them. So wouldn't that kind of raise suspicions within employees and ultimately cause disgruntled employees
Right.
rather than help your company?
Or choices to not continue to comply with productive behavior.
Right.
I would offer to you yet another theory. I don't remember the name that goes along with this, but you can jot this down in your notes. Equity theory of motivation. When you look that up, don't get hung up on zeros and pluses and minuses and mathematical comparisons of this, but think about just equity. You know, in terms of your look at what you do and what you get in comparison with what other people do and what they get. And if I think it's equitable, then I keep on doing this. But if I feel like what's happening to me is not equitable, as what you're talking about, I will eventually choose not to comply with behavior anymore, and the system will break down. So think about, it's called the equity theory of motivation. You know, so, okay, let's move to another article. We could talk about these things forever. Give me your thoughts on the next wave. I don't know whether that's Generation X or, you know, whether it's just completely outsourcing and it's a cultural thing and we're going to deal with countries, but just thoughts, anybody, what hit you?
I
Yes,
did
sir.
like the comment about how, you know, we outsource because it's cheaper. Like when McDonald's outsourced their drive-through
To India.
to India, yeah. And so I like the comment that, well, now they're charging, you know, $150 an hour, and at that rate, you know, might as well just go to Silicon Valley because, you know, it's the same price, and so outsourcing in India isn't really beneficial anymore in that sense. And so, you know, they're looking at China or other places to outsource to. And in my head, I was thinking that eventually they'll all be on the same level, you know.
Yeah, so where the advantages to outsourcing in the beginning were created sort of from that a similar concept to what the Japanese did in the world markets post-World War II, when they commanded an incredible amount of market share through lower prices, what some people would call loss leaders. But they dropped the prices of what they were doing on the on the international markets so great that they commanded a market share that was just astronomical, and then followed that up with, oh, guess what? We're raising prices now. We own you. And so it's a similar concept. And then so what do? The price is the same here or there. Where are you going to buy from? You know, so it is interesting, you know. Other comments on that next wave?
I just liked how they cautioned people to be careful about how much they invest in it, and that it's actually starting to hit the downfall of it, of where it may not be a good idea to invest so much time and energy and money into outsourcing. And their logistics behind it, I mean, they seem accurate and everything. Like, if somebody's clear across the world and you don't have face-to-face time with them, how do you really know what they really are doing, and if they really are on your side, or if they're going to undercut you and go to another company because
Right.
they're going to pay them more?
One of the things that kind of hit me was sort of the complexity and the confusion of where those markets really are anyway. And this article even mentioned several countries, and in my own experiences in the last 10 years, I think that there's other players out there that weren't even mentioned. India certainly is one, and China. And there's comments about how the commitment to tech education and numbers education and computer education in India and China is far outstripping us. And some of the educators in America have been telling our systems that if we don't increase, you know, science and math and computers, even at the high school level, we're going to lose. And we continue not to do it. And they're doing it, we're not. So we're losing there in that way. And then you throw Japan and Korea into the mix, and now you've got yet other folks that are, I mean, I think this article even made one comment that somebody from another country knew more about my own language than they did. Another couple of players that in my experience are really out there are Ireland and Romania, you know, in the tech industries. You know, they've got some incredible talent that is out there. And you look at numbers of people in America, not necessarily outsourcing, but insourcing. I don't know if that's the accurate terminology, but instead of hiring an American, you know, educated in an American system, you know, you'll find a fairly significant percentage of the workforce at places like Microsoft from Ireland, from Romania, from India. So is it the same thing? And I don't know. It just depends on whether or not you believe in some cooperative definition of globalization, or if you believe in taking care of our own. I mean, I don't know where the answer is. But what I get out of the article, it's pretty complicated. It is happening. There's lots of stuff going on all over, and we just need to be aware of it. You know, and so what are our choices, and how do we deal with that? The dark side. What hits you from that article?
Is this the one where he was talking about all of those posters, you know, like climb to the top and that they really just don't do it? I mean, they don't
False
motivate.
charisma.
Yeah, they just really, save your money, don't buy the posters because it really doesn't do anything for
Where
your
where does that sort of false vision break down?
Yeah.
Running joke.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's great for the first time you read it, and then after that, it becomes just another picture.
I didn't even make that connection, but interesting that you did, because one of my sort of pet peeves about the rah-rah motivational circuit is exactly that. You didn't close the loop. I mean, give me a vision, give me a passion, give me an idea, teach me some techniques on motivation, get me stoked about the product line that we're going to bring to the marketplace, but keep me going. Don't send me to a 2-day workshop and then cut me off.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, and where does that stop? You got to bring it back to the floor.
and use it.
Exactly.
And use it. I mean,
Yeah. And many of the rah-rah motivational circuits stop right there. You go back to the company and it's over. But you got a poster on the wall. Yeah, so I don't know. I get that out of it. What else do y'all get out of this article?
oh,
Part of it is an excessive push on charisma, and at what point, that's not accessible. I think that they mentioned Max Weber's use of the word charisma and talked about how that's something extraordinary, but how many of us can really access those unbelievable either emotional, behavioral, or spiritual views of the world and can convert that into our own behavior? We look at the Hitlers and the Gandhis, and those are like, okay, I'm going to study about that, but yeah, it doesn't make a difference to me. Maybe it does. Maybe you talked to them or interacted with them, and maybe that's why I get sort of, passionate. But when I've got a book with Tom Peters' autograph in it, and when I talk to Warren Bennis by a swimming pool for 4 hours, it's like, okay, I did connect, But how do I put that back and share that without being sort of here's this magic out there that's not accessible? And is the magic that I'm connected to just me, and is it selfish, or is it somehow going to connect with an ability for all of us to move in a direction that is successful for our company? That's another thing that Posner's latest book, in their interviews with people about, this is the opposite of what we're seeing in the dark side. When they ask people to describe their best leadership event, there's an overwhelming number of interviews, and they've done thousands of these over the last 20 or so years. There's an overwhelming percentage of the leaders that will come back and say, do you mean when our people did this? Do you mean when we did this? Do you mean when my department? Instead of, oh, do you mean when I did the next product line? They immediately move it out of self and into we. And he says that's an incredible statistic, in their leadership research. It's not me and my vision, it's our vision and what we all did together.
so that's a good thing.
That's a great thing.
Okay. Because I was going to comment on this Pyrrhic, Victor,
Yeah.
Pyrr, in that, I don't know, maybe just the people that I've done books for and done accounting for, but I've seen this failed vision where the leader has blinders on and we are going to do this,
Right.
and everybody around him is like, what are we going to use that? I mean, it was like the DeLorean car.
But they still do it.
It's like the DeLorean car that they were talking about. They could have made a profit on 6,000 of them, but he insists on making 20,000 of them.
Yeah.
And they're bankrupt.
So at what point does the individual sort of myopia become contraindicated to organizational success?
Yeah.
Right? My view breaks us all down. My view ought to bring us all together to organizational success rather than individual success.
And what's really tragic is, if you own the business and you have these blinders on and you want to do it this way, great. But if you don't own the business, you've got other people that are owning the business and you're running it, that's tragic.
Yeah, but even if you do own the business and it's purely personal and private, not connected to public, not connected to anybody, so what? But you still have how many people work for you.
Yeah.
Don't you have some kind of accountability? Well, an accountant does, because we've got a fiduciary responsibility
Right.
to make appropriate decisions for the collective, especially if we're publicly traded. There's a hand back here.
This kind of also ties back in the first article about the corporate culture.
Yeah.
But would it be fair to say that previous President Fatimi was
Yeah,
sort
Fatimi
of that,
Hosro.
Fatimi was sort of that way? He
I-
showed up and he had his agenda, and it didn't fit with, it didn't jive with the school,
Not only the school, the region, the culture.
It just, and he would have, you know, been great somewhere else, but here it just
Maybe.
didn't, yeah, it could have been. But it
I,
just,
I don't want to be sounding really prejudiced because he was a foreign person, but in defense of him, he would have been great in his own culture.
yeah,
But when he came to this culture, and which was really very, very intriguing because you would have thought that the diversity would have been great. But when he began to talk to folks in the region, he alienated people on a daily basis.
yeah.
And he had no idea about who we were as a regional school and what our customer base was. You know, and when he went into high schools and said, your people aren't qualified to come to EOU, it's like, wait a minute, this is not too good for us.
And so that, to me, is kind of
Right.
my view of the blinders, you know.
Yeah, it was a blinder.
He was just doing
kinda thing.
his thing and not really seeing what did and didn't work. You know, he just kept doing his
Yeah.
thing.
I'll give you a very real example of that. When I first came to EOU from Lewis Clark State College, another small school, and you've heard me talk about our evaluation standards. There's two different organizations really that evaluate us. The American Assembly of Collegiate Schools of Business, which is basically research schools in business. And then there's the International Assembly of Collegiate Business Education Programs, which is essentially, if you're trying to differentiate the two evaluating groups, they evaluate the big schools on their research agendas, and they evaluate schools like us on how well we teach. And so we're a teaching school, they're research schools. Hallsville came from research background. And even then, there's some question about that. And he started calling me into his office because he knew that I had just done some international work, and we were trying to get some international grants that were research grants. We were going to become a regional research center for international business education. Okay, thank you very much. You see the disconnect between what we really have the capacity to do, who we are already. Now, maybe we need to change. Jack Welch may be right. If the rate of change outside the organization is faster than the rate of change in the organization, the end is in sight. But culturally, product-wise, delivery-wise, service-wise, who we are, we're not ever going to be a research school. You're not going to create us as a research center. Maybe ISU in Pokey, right? But that's a different school. But for him to set an agenda that you guys will be that, it was a total disconnect, you know, in terms of setting an agenda for the business division at EOU. So interesting. Other comments on the dark side? Yes, ma'am.
I thought it was interesting the part about the communication skills and how some people just have a way with speaking when, you know, in a meeting setting where they can make something sound so good, and everyone, you know, they don't question them at the time because it sounds good, but then after the meeting they go off and try and put that into action, and it just, you can't quite figure it out. And so
Fessinger calls that cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. So it was just
Yeah.
interesting that they brought that up, that because that happens a lot with some people.
Yeah.
It sounds good at the
Once
time.
again, a dark side thing, a whole lot of things happen, you know, whether I'm communicating right or whether or not I have this sort of false sense of charisma and presenting imaging and excitement that's not connected, or, you know, it seems to me that it kind of comes back down to that I'm putting out my agenda without thinking about what the total is either capable of or should do or is willing to do if we're going to change. You know, there's a hand up.
Yeah, going on with her theme with the communication thing, that tying it back to the, you know, Davies versus, you know, Fatamy, Davies and Dixie, you know, you'd see them both constantly all over campus, walking, talking, you know, had this constant thing of communication, not with just, you know, the VPs, but students and, you know, facility workers, and I don't think I ever once saw,
I was always called to his office.
yeah, I never saw him
And
out.
today, 3 different occasions, I ran across Bob Davies
Yeah, and it's
at
just
different places on campus.
communication difference.
You know, it's entirely different. Yes, sir.
I think that's kind of the blinders, or I was thinking tunnel vision, is you get
Maybe,
so
yeah.
caught up in your vision, and I was on I was one of a 6-person leadership team, and we always, since we were all on equal footing, you know, one of us would get tunnel vision and start to go off on this tangent that we thought was great, or maybe 2 of us would, and then the other 5 or 4 or however many would go. You know, they kind of grab you by the back of the collar and drag you back into reality. So
But
I think
so you
having
got that
this-
collective thing going on once again.
Yeah, and I think it's with, you know, Bob's out around,
Yeah.
and he gets in touch, but if you don't have that capability to do that, you almost need somebody who's in touch with reality to grab you every once in a while and kind of
Right.
drag you back
The
in.
recognition that I need this.
Yeah,
And see, but that's like the emperor with no clothes kind of thing going on. It's like, am I willing to hire somebody that's a dissident thinker and really get in my face about it? Or am I not willing to do that, you know? And it's like, what I hear is that the better leaders are certainly willing to look at all kinds of viewpoints. We might still go with my own decision, but at least we've sort of taken the time. That's another thing that Posner talks about, get outside of yourself.
Yeah.
What's the trends? Get somebody to give you a different point of view. You've got your area, ask somebody from another area to say, what's going on out there? One of my better experiences as a young faculty at Lewis Clark State College was being assigned to membership on a societal trends committee. Wow, it was amazing. There was a VP and 2 deans and 2 faculty, and I was like the youngest, most unknowing of the bunch, and I just kind of like watched them as they dreamed and thought and look at, you know, demographics and who's out there and what are we going to do with education. And that fueled a lot of the direction that school had, which was great, you know, but I don't think it was bad leadership at all. But there were a couple of people in that were accused of being, you know, selfish. But when you looked at the total stuff of what was going on, they had a lot of information out there on the table that was gathered around who we should be. Yes, ma'am. Last comment for this one.
Okay, to tie back in around this idea back to building a culture, the thing with President Davies is, I don't know like what they do with the other athletic teams, but I know the soccer team on numerous occasions, his wife and daughters would bake us cookies, and they'd be in individual little Ziploc bags and have a note like, good luck at your game, and things like that. And he would come to our games. He came to our OIT game because he was in the relative area at a conference or something, and so he'd come over to our games even when they were away, and it builds a good culture having a president that's so involved with the campus like
Taking
that.
the time to connect all the way through the organization.
Yep.
All the way down. You know, another story there is a culture and all these. Dale Aldrich, he got the Small Business Man of the Year award in Lewiston. He and his brother bought the franchise and patent rights to what I call mini chainsaw on a stick, and created a 100-person business or more in Lewiston there. And to have such a reputation as a, quote, autocratic manager, one of the first things that he did was created a thing on every Friday at lunch. Everybody in the company had pizza together, shut down the lines and everything. And it was like the presidents, the vice presidents, even if you were out in the field, you know, as one of the marketing execs, you had to come back in every once in a while just to be online there. And then bring it into the production site, you know, and clean it up enough to where it was great. Everybody's together. This is our company, not mine or not yours. It's all together. Last one, narcissism. Maybe the same as the previous one in a slightly different way. What's your thoughts on that one?
I have a few thoughts that kind of run together. After reading the article, you know, I find it's really sad that the roots of narcissism, though, are both developmental and genetic. However, I am glad that narcissism can be distinguished from true leadership. I think it's frightening how narcissistic leaders control by the way of abuse and exploiting people, as opposed to enhancing and facilitating the values of others. And when I think about it and how it affects our sustainability of our society, because of functioning societies, we're dependent on collaborative and mutual group efforts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just.
I have a couple of comments on that, but I mean, let's get some other thoughts on that or more? I mean, does that make sense to what she said? I mean, I really hear that, and I'll make a comment on it in a minute, but maybe I'll make a comment on it now. It is sad when we see people follow it. Matter of fact, that one of the dialogues that's going on this quarter in one of my classes is the difference between dictatorial and democratic behavior. And there was a concern about why do people follow dictators? And we had a lot of conversation. Well, it's like, because I don't have to worry about the decisions anymore. It's like it's really comfort to go back to my, being a child again. And so I'll follow that. But it's like, at what point do we get duped into that sort of like charismatic behavior out there that's put out in front of us? So it's really kind of resonates throughout all these articles. If you want to really study that to extremes, look into the sociology work of cults, and how cult leaders sort of move people, and it's very selfish, my kind of thing. So actually, one of the books that I'm selecting for a class that I'll be teaching in the winter, called Sustainable Leadership, is from a lady from the Jepson School of Leadership, Joanne Ciula, and it's called The Ethics of Leadership. And it's sort of a departure for me because it's a very, very specific judgment of leadership theory that we're not going to evaluate leaders by results produced. If they produce results, they're leaders, period. That's one viewpoint. And so that sort of begs the issue with both of these articles, Conger's Dark Side and Kester-Vree's Narcissism, that says, you know what? I don't want to evaluate leadership according to results produced. I believe that for everybody's greater good concern, we need to evaluate leadership according to some moral compass. And what do we do? How do we establish some ethical criteria for determining that leadership that you just described was not particularly good for everybody? And so I would offer to you, not in totality, but maybe just as one way of looking at some more positive ways of evaluating leader behavior, would be look at the results produced by these folk over the long term and look at how many people were positively influenced by their results. Now, this was controversial for me when I had this discussion in my classes in Hayden Lake, when members of the Aryan Nations Brotherhood were members of my class, and said, I want to talk about the difference between Jesus and Hitler. And they said, no, wait a minute, you're already in trouble. But if I apply that criteria, now again, this is not a church college, and I'm not coming at it from this perspective, but most of society can understand these two examples very graphically, that if I apply the criteria of long-term results over lots of people, right? Hitler was quite a few people over a short period of time, and then it broke apart. It wasn't sustainable. Jesus, whether we agree or if that's who you are or not, how many thousands of years? Long-term, positive results for most people that apply, and lots of people. And you can apply that to any number of events. I would ask you to take events and take leaders, both at the local level and at a global level, and see if you could apply that criteria to them. Did the results that they produce impact lots of people over a longer period of time? Chances are that's good stuff. It's not hurting people, And when it's maybe an intense group of people, but a short time, and then it falls apart, then you got to wonder if that's sustainable for larger people and over the greater good. So, but again, your judgment criteria there. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's move on. It's 7:30. Let's take about a 5-minute break, and then I'd like to come back and let's quickly see if we can spend maybe about an hour doing some really quick conversations about papers. think maybe if, let me just turn this off. This
Did
is-
you want to go over them again together?
No, not necessarily. Because I did. God, how do you just do it that way? when we talk about this critical incident evaluation and the willingness to sort of look at mistakes, right? And you either do it because that's all you do and it becomes such a negative factor, or you're afraid to even go there. And it clearly is something that we shouldn't do, but you're not willing to engage in that. Rather than honestly looking at what's working and what's not. Not in a punitive way, but in a, can we work this out way? Can I talk to you about what's not working without making you afraid, without belittling you, with just an honest or blameless look at what's working and what's not working. And we need to do that, but we don't need to hurt people on the way to that. So it's yeah.
If we remove that, if you're doing like an evaluation, if you remove that and say, business-wise, this is what we see, and keep all those other emotions out, it helps. I think it helps.
We did before I got here, when I was still at Oregon State, and previous to that I was on FFA, the Future Farmers, on the state leadership level, and then I worked coaching the state leadership teams for several years. And one of the things we did that always helped us was after every event that I participated in, and it was cultural for that group, the state leadership, and it makes a pretty strong state leadership team. But after every event and everything you do what's called circle the wagons, and everybody sits down together and goes, what went right? Okay, good, let's keep doing that. And what went wrong?
Right.
Why did it go wrong? And how
Can we do this again?
How can we make it better for the next time? And there's a lot of things, you go into a high school and you do a leadership workshop, and then after the leadership
Because you
workshop,
debriefed the last one.
yeah, and you knew, so you could fix the things
Right.
that went wrong or adjust and tweak.
Yeah.
And there were some things, if you're in a high school classroom, that you can't fix just because of the classroom style, but there were some things structurally within the leadership team that you can fix. And it was also interesting to see the different personalities on different leadership teams and how they handled that, because some people take that creative criticism very personally, and then some people take it,
And move on with it.
I screwed up here and we need to fix it here, and this is how we'll be better next time, so.
One of the success factors, and again, I'm not so sure that it was me, or as it was somebody told me, Gerry, this will work if you do it this way. When I was doing the team building leadership workshops for the city of Lewiston, we didn't call it circle the wagons, but we did, for every one of the 30-person workshops that we did on team building and leadership, a month later, we had a voluntary brown bag that we called Close the Loop. And people were invited to come back in and say, what worked, what didn't? Are you using this stuff? Was it worthless? Can we do some more of it? What recommendations do you have? And those were pretty potent. It was just a couple of hours on a Friday, a month after, and it was like bringing it back home. What are we doing with this stuff? You guys still alive out there? Give me some logistical feedback about where you're at in terms of your psychic energy tonight to keep on going or not going. I keep in mind that we've always got this sort of how many hours are we sitting in these chairs kind of thing. As always, and this is not going to come as any great shake to anybody that may or may not listen to these tapes, but it's no great secret that that's not the way that I evaluate myself. I'm less concerned about how many hours we're sitting and occupying this airspace, and I'm more concerned about sharing the information that we've learned over the course of a quarter. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 people times 2 things, which would be 34 minutes, even if everybody spoke 1 minute on each thing that they talked about, or 2 minutes, and a very, very fast transaction. I have been known to do things like that with what I would call a Gatling gun approach and say, all right, you got 1 minute, what do you want to say? You got 1 minute, what do you want to say? You got 1 minute. And we could do that. Or we could mutually agree. Now, I really do not have an answer here, so it's not being autocratic in terms of I've already made my mind up. I'm just trying to get a sense of where y'all are at here. But the alternatives are, we gut it out, play with this tonight, or in the next 48 to 72 hours, each of us and the students that are not here go online to the discussion sites and put some comments about your company evaluations in your papers, and we talk to each other over the next week. So there's some alternatives.
I personally was excited about my report and would like to talk about that.
Okay.
But I sense that maybe you would like to do us all the same way.
Well, no, that's not, that was not my interpretation, or not my
I think
impression.
there's a benefit to that, though. I mean, because we're gonna have to go on there and talk on theirs anyway, just to get that interaction stuff. So
That may well, yeah, if
it
I'm
may be
asking you to
easier
do
just
that,
do it, for everyone to do it in the same kind of format.
Hermiston, Clarkston, that's over there someplace, that's in another place. Your observations, comments, it's a logistical process. We've got some stuff that I really want us to get through. And I really think it's beneficial for us to share that with each other. What happened, and I'm especially
My work schedule's trick.
to do that. I lost you.
I did that. I was just gonna say it's snowing really bad over here. And it's so icy.
All right, then that's it. So that was there. That's 4 people that really need to go home now. How about where are we at in Hermiston?
Not do it.
Well, I guess we've had a discussion here, and we feel that because of the situation where some of us aren't here, it might be a better forum for us to just discuss everything in our discussion board
Okay.
and get some feedback that way.
All right, here's a command decision, and I'm not trying to cut off your excitement, Mark, but greater good kind of a thing. I tell you what, let's do this. I'll put another email back on the board, and those of you that need to go, go. I'm not going to hold us all accountable. What I would like for everybody to do is get online and post some comments. I don't have the exact comments with me, but it's something of this nature that with regard to your paper, it's give me a couple comments, what you learned and what's the impact of that, recommendations kind of thing. With regard to your company, it's what changes did you make or not in your evaluation criteria, and then as a result of your new evaluation, what's your impression of that company now, and what impact did that have on your perceptions of the company? You thought of it in one way, it either changed or didn't change because you added some evaluative criteria, and then thirdly, what would you recommend for the future of that company? Assuming that you may be the consultant for that company, would you say that they could change their behavior based on your evaluation? But those are very precise, and they're not intended to be long, exhaustive comments, like a couple of bullet points each one. So, command decision, get online, make your comments, and those of you that need to go, go. I'm going to keep this on, and anybody wants to stay, and we'll just have some informal conversations for a bit if you want to. I'm not offline, but feel free to go. Get online in the next 48, post your comments, and drive safe. Okay? Is that fair enough? Thank you for a good quarter. I need to say this to those of you that are here. I'm listening in just a second. Dr. Clements and I have talked several times about how excited we are about this group of folks. So, and that would have been one of the advantages for us to continue the face-to-face, but hopefully that'll come up in your posted comments, that we've got a real diverse group with a lot of skills and a lot of talent out there, and sharing with each other what you're bringing to the table as a beginning MBA student for us is really exciting. So thank you for joining us, and I'm sure the other faculty are looking forward to having you in their classes in the future. So thanks for a good quarter. It's not quite over yet. I'll see you online. Okay, fair enough? There was a hand here. Did I cut you off? Hermiston, you had a hand up? Somewhere. Okay, is that a bye-bye hand? Bye-bye, so long, farewell. I hate to see you go. All right. Thanks. Have a good evening. Drive safe.
Dr. Ramey,
Yes, sir.
what is the deadline for those responses on the discussion board for tonight's papers and stuff?
Well, discussion, if it's going to make any sense, we need to play that out in the next 48.
Okay.
I'd say give yourself 48 hours, get something online. That gives us, what, another 4 to 5 days? I would like to sort of wrap this up by December 6th, December 7th. Is that fair?
7th. You said 7th. Yeah.
6 or 7. Give me, I'm not going to drop dead and die if it's not all in on the 6th. I've set aside the 7th and 8th to really just have at finishing up evaluations. It makes my grading a little easier. So 2 days, get something online. Let's talk to each other for another 4 or 5. Then we call it good. Fair enough?
How many are we required to respond to each other in the discussion board?
Be reasonable. At this point, even 1 or 2 is fair enough. But don't just get on and say, I agree, I disagree. Interact with each other responsively. I hate to give numbers because the minute that I say numbers, you put on 3 comments and say, yes, I agree, no, that was a bad comment, and it stops there. But even at this point, once or twice, and you're not going to respond to everybody, read them all, look at them and say, oh, that's pretty cool, I like that. But did you think about, or my thoughts were, that kind of thing. Did that answer your question? I know that at this point in schedules, everybody's got work schedules. It's really hard to get online. Some of you are not as insane about, my family says, shut your computer, Dad. So, okay. Does that help? I don't know if it helps or not. I'm not getting any response.
We couldn't hear you, there was a glitch.
Oh.
But yes, it answered.
Can you hear me now? I'm saying
Yeah.
be reasonable in your responses. You don't have to respond to 27 entries times 2. So, 27 papers and 27 other things. But as you read them all, I would expect that you do read them all, but maybe something hits you a little stronger, either positively or negatively. Hit a couple of those and say, hey, what do you think about this? And that should generate somebody else's 1 or 2 or 3. And so in totality, as you read them all, but choose selectively that which you're responding to, we get an aggregate increase in everybody's knowledge base without having to make 34 I agrees and I disagrees, which is worthless. Does that make sense? So you post yours, read them all, make a couple of comments, couple of 3 to everybody else, and hopefully we increase everybody's knowledge. Are we clear okay now? Okay, gotcha. Now drive safe. All right, I'm not quite offline yet, so hopefully. Y'all okay here? I'm turning off the computer or the whatever here. So, yeah. Well, hopefully you'll get a chance to put.
Mine was on entropy.
Oh, yeah. Now, did you hear what his is on? No. Entropy. No. John and I'll create your own audience on that one.